Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. My presentation concerns the wettability of contact lenses and the fundamental role played by the lacrimal film. Aging is associated with a number of physiological changes that can have an impact on the lacrimal film, with reduction in tear volume, increase in osmolarity, and increase in instability of the film, with an alteration in lipids secreted by tarsal glands. The meibomian glands, they are large glands located in the tarsal region, especially in the upper lid. And they secrete lipids that are released through a central duct and reach an excretory duct to reach the lid margin and reach the mucocutaneous junction. How's the lipid production regulated? We have hormonal components, androgens, estrogens, progestogens, and then muscle contraction by the areolanus muscle and the muscles involved in blinking. External factors include neurotransmitters. Let's look at the lacrimal film. The breakdown between polar and non-polar lipids is not known yet. There's a difference to be highlighted. When the fluid reaches the lacrimal film, some proteins have an impact on the physical properties of the lipid layer, lysozyme or surfactant proteins.
In realtà abbiamo la parte soggettiva, ma
so we need to look at symptoms. Some people say that there are no correlations between symptoms and signs. So we need to perform a differential investigation. Symptoms are investigated through questionnaires. As regards signs, based on the different areas to be investigated, we use different tools, such as the slit lamp, and then we look at the mass, the gland mass, and lipidoscopy to investigate in interferometric pattern. The mammography used to be carried out using transillumination. It was very invasive and not easy to use for the patient. Now we have contactless instruments. They just take an infrared picture that can be analyzed. A number of classifications have been taken into account, different grading scales that are provided in the imaging software package. There's a very important international working group on meibomian gland dysfunctioning. So a working group was set up to investigate gland dysfunction. Meibomian glands play an important role. However, certain mechanisms are not clear yet, like quantity and quality of lipids secreted and the stem cells location in these glands. So some experts are trying to provide a definition of dysfunction of these glands. By dysfunction, they mean an alteration of the gland. It is a chronic and diffuse anomaly affecting most glands. we have higher low outflow dysfunction with obstruction of the terminal duct or hyperkeratization of the duct or very dense secreted or secretions that can block the duct. There are many factors to be taken into account, such as contact lens use and age. Professor Falleni promoted this study in order to investigate the correlation between different contact lenses. In the literature, we can find many studies on the role of contact lenses and their impact on meibomian glands. So we decided to look at silicon hydrogel contact lenses. We collected data and then we wondered what's the impact of age on non-contact lens wearers. We tried to develop a design for our study and identify our samples. We excluded all subjects taking drugs for the treatment of meibomian glands, antihistamines, antidepressants, contact lens wearers, but that was not all. We decided to extend our criteria by excluding all subjects with the diseases indicated on the slide. It's taken over 1.5 years to find our patients. So we needed, it wasn't easy to find children that had the required criteria, people over 60 that had no hypertension, for instance. We recruited people between 10 and 90 years. They had to sign the informed consent forms, and we perform a mammography. So I had two people that worked with me, David and Francesco, who processed images. I didn't want to be conditioned in assessing images. So they did two readings in two different moments. In fact, all the data were imported into an Excel file, and then they were submitted to statistical analysis with a regression technique. We looked at the upper and lower lid separately. There's a very similar study that I could only get hold of a couple of days ago, where lids or glands better were analyzed as a whole. In fact, we wanted to perform a separate analysis because there's a difference between the upper and lower lid. They have different amounts of glands, the amount of lipids released into the lacrimal film. So we decided to analyze them separately. As regards the lower lid, there's a very weak correlation, a high dispersion coefficient. There are two dots up there. We thought there were artifacts, but then we double-checked, and they were real data, and we left them there, even if they are outliers. As regards the upper lid, there's a higher correlation, but still a very weak one. You can see a confidence interval is quite clear. We can immediately see that in the lower lid, there's more data dispersion or data scatter compared to the upper lid. Data scatter is observed in people below 30 years of age, especially in the lower lid. We observed the following: between 10 and 35 years, all data fall within a given standard deviation, and between 40 and 70 years, those data are more scattered. But that's not necessarily age-related, so we should focus on other factors which should be taken into account because they have a greater impact, such as hormonal changes past age 40. The lower lid has to move less during blinking, so atrophy is more frequently observed in the lower lid because it's more static, it moves less, and atrophy may develop. The upper lid having to move all the time during blinking movements, and muscles stay more active. But this is our subjective impression. We looked at the loss every 6 months. For the upper lid, less than 1%. The age group between 10 and 50, and up to 2%, and 2% up to 90 years. The total it's the total loss of a gland spread out to the total. So we try to examine the two readings of the two observers, and we could find a high value. There was a good inter-observer correlation. There were two observers, an experienced and an unexperienced one. One of them was doing it for the first time, so we have a 0.7 coefficient, and we can see that we have a good inter-observer agreement. If we repeat measurements in a year time, we can find very small difference. There's a good inter-observer agreement as well, so experience doesn't have any impact on data. Let me conclude by saying the following. There are exogenous and endogenous factors contributing to the alteration of meibomian glands, and of course obstruction can be observed, and dry eye is one of the consequences. We can adopt a medical treatment for that. We need to educate our patients. They need to learn good lid hygiene. Let's start looking at the lids and see if there's anything wrong with the lids, and educate our patients. Patients have to be explained that they have to keep good lid hygiene. So always try to take pictures of everything you do so that you can make comparisons in the long term, and use questionnaires for data collection. Let me stress that new additional studies are being planned using OCT or the confocal microscopy, because, of course, meibomian glands are very important, but we know very little about them. Thank you.